Well, hello and welcome to the shortlist. It is Wednesday, the 17th of February, as we're recording this. And for myself in the northwestern part of Europe, it's becoming springtime. We're starting to see the signs of spring. It's getting brighter. But again, if today you're waking up in Texas, you're looking at absolutely Arctic conditions and freezing cold. So maybe you're not so optimistic about spring as we are here in Dublin, where we're recording the show. But you're very welcome. We've got a great show planned. We've got two fantastic guests joining us today to spark a conversation, hopefully get some of you who are listening perhaps live to join in with your comments and questions. We, as always, would love to hear from you. For those of you who listen to as a podcast recording, you're very welcome. We'll have any links that we discuss here shared in the show notes. Those listening on podcast, don't forget this is a live show that does broadcast. If you'd like to join every Wednesday at 4 p.m. UK time on YouTube and also on LinkedIn on my profile, Johnny Campbell. I am the CEO and co-founder of Social Talent. If you want to find me, you can dig into LinkedIn and find me. For those of you watching live, you can listen to this as a podcast. You'll find it on Spotify, Apple, or where you find your good podcasts. And if you'd like to find out a list of our upcoming shows, our previous shows, or anything else about the shortlist, you can do so at socialtalent.com/the shortlist. So let's get into the show. So this week, what I want to talk about is exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly talking about how do you keep this top of the agenda when it's out of the news. Like, we're recording this in 2021. 2020, we ran several shows. It was top of mind for a lot of people. But then organizations go into a new cycle of strategy and planning, and we start a new year, if you're running the fiscal year, the same as the calendar year. And maybe it isn't as high in the agenda. Or maybe it is, but you feel that in your organization, it isn't quite being given the focus it was perhaps in the second half of last year. I think we'll all agree it's rightly moved from a nice to have for certain organizations to an intrinsic necessity for every organization to be able to attract talent, retain their talent, and attract and retain customers critically. But it makes for better workplaces. It makes for better bottom lines. We all understand both the business case and the ethical case for it. But sometimes it feels like it takes an atrocity, like we had last summer, for diversity to be fully highlighted. And to talk about that, we thought we'd invite two people to join us from a firm who have been working on this for quite a long time. I know it's an organization I've admired from afar as to how they've been dealing with these topics, often quite ahead of their peers and ahead of many organizations around the world. And that organization is EY. And joining us from the UK Ireland business in EY today, we have Catalina Hernandez, who is the Assistant Director of Diversity and Inclusiveness. And we have Matthew Jeffrey, who is the Talent Attraction and Acquisition Director for UK IE at EY. Catalina and Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Johnny. An honor to join you.
Well, I was wondering, maybe starting with Catalina, you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, maybe just some background in terms of your history, how you ended up working in this space and working with EY. And then, Matt, I'll ask you the same question.
Sure. So personally, I was born and raised in Colombia in South America in a really small town. And I immigrated to the US when I was little. And throughout my younger years, I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And after graduating from university, I realized I didn't want to do that. And I went into recruitment. And that's where my career started. And through recruitment, I started experiencing the common workplace microaggressions. Things were said about my background, the way we spoke about diverse candidates and hiring for diversity just felt really problematic to me. And I started speaking up more and talking about diversity in the way that we recruited. And that's really where I saw my passion. And so I started my career in recruitment, but slowly and surely started focusing on diversity more and more. And I moved to the UK last summer, or actually summer 2019, and started focusing on it completely. And so I started at EY as the diversity recruitment lead for experienced hire recruitment, and have since transitioned to a role on our central D&I team, focusing on all of our efforts and how we support our business through this journey that we're on ultimately. And that's how I met Matthew.
Excellent. I won't go into how I met Matthew. That's going to be a much longer conversation. But Matthew, maybe tell us a little bit your journey and how you managed to join EY.
Yeah, my sort of journey is that after coming from agency background, I moved into Electronic Arts, a video games company, spent 8 years there. Head of studio recruitment for EMEA, and then became their global employment brand director, one of the first sort of roles that encompassed employment brand many years ago. I then spent 2 years at Autodesk, heading up EMEA and global employment brand for them. And in the last 7 years, I've been at SAP, again, working with the employment brand team and the global sourcing team. So great 7 years there. So now at EY and focused on UKI, and yeah, working with Catalina to try and make a difference in diversity and really take some bold initiatives to get us ahead of the pack.
So we can tell a lot these days on a Zoom call or broadcast from a person's room. We can see Matt's surrounded by football memorabilia and wearing his Man United shirts. Catalina, you've got your treadmill and your Peloton in the background. And we just before we went live, I was giving out to you for not having left your home for 4 weeks. That's a whole other discussion about mental health and everything else. We need to get you out. But I probably don't advise you visiting that room full of football memorabilia that Matt is in. As many of you may know, I'm not a sports person that really follow any football teams, but I do see the symbol in the back hanging on your door, Matt, which makes me very proud. And you know, I don't know if either of you know this series of books. I think it's Little People, Big Ideas. There's a series of books. They're originally created for kids, you know, the Matt, and the original kind of 30 titles were all kind of more brilliant female leaders and artists and poets and scientists, and they've slowly but surely expanded and let some male kind of representatives in there, but the big focus was trying to teach kids about female leaders. And now it's kind of just, you know, a broader sense of different artists. But this year they added a brand new artist to their title, and that was Prince. So I bought the Prince book to add to our collection for my kids, and we've been playing Prince a lot in our house these days, Matt. You'd be glad to hear.
I'm proud of you. I have that book as well.
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome. Anyway, that aside, as we do on the show every week, what I want to do is start with just jumping into some kind of topical live news articles. I'm going to ask Niall in the back room to start us off with our first news item this week. First piece of news has come from People Management. It's published in the UK by an author called Remy Baker, who is herself managing director of a firm that work with organizations around culture and diversity and inclusion. And it's titled, "It's Up to Businesses to Keep the BLM Movement Alive." And obviously referring to Black Lives Matter and the movement that was kicked off last summer with the unlawful killing of George Floyd. And this is kind of it's a rally cry that goes into then what Remy describes as kind of 3 core points or 3 ways to keep the movement alive. I want to get your opinion both on this article. You know, do you feel, first of all, do you agree it's up to businesses to keep this alive? And second of all, you know, what are your thoughts on Remy's points on methods to do this?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, you know, it's not just up to businesses, it's up to all of us to keep the messages alive. And, you know, I remember back to the atrocity with George Floyd last year, and the impact on the business was absolutely, it just went like a shockwave through the business. You know, speaking to colleagues on the team, colleagues who went very quiet and they really felt what had happened and the impact of that death. And it was, again, talking and listening. And it was just amazing, the sense that we needed to do something as a company. And, you know, as we look at things today, is I always say to our team, it shouldn't take an atrocity to keep things alive. We need to live diversity 24/7. And we're doing this for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years to bring in and make the company more inclusive, to bring in that sense of belonging. So I think, you know, as a leader of the recruitment function in UKI recruitment, you know, I feel it very personally that our team can make a massive difference to the company in who we seek to attract and how we make people belong to the culture we have. So absolutely, the whole team shares this commitment, and we're not waiting for the next atrocity to come up, which will come up. We are continuing to live and breathe this, and we want to show the results that we have as we go along. So, you know, Catalina, I know you share this passion and you live this daily as well.
Yeah, definitely, Matthew. And I think in reading the article, you know, the author highlights these 3 specific points around you shouldn't shrink away from conversations, and you should be intentional about educating yourself and treating diversity and inclusion as an imperative. And I think all of those points are incredibly important. But what I think is missing when sometimes people read these articles is they say they absorb that and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I care. But then what's next? And I think that's the most important part, is you can't just read this 1,000-word article and assume that you've done enough, that you've done the reading. The educating yourself comes in many different ways. It often comes from being told that you're wrong, and from making a mistake and saying the wrong thing. And so I think articles like this are important for starting a conversation, but it shouldn't be the only thing that somebody consumes.
A word I want to pick on there you used there is intentional, or intentionality, Catalina. Reminds me, and I've used this quote before, it comes from a friend of mine, Joe Gershon, who I admire his work and the way he speaks around inclusion and diversity. But he likened D&I to exercise. He said, we all agree that being healthy and doing exercise is the right thing to do. We all agree that we should keep fit and we should be out there and, eating well. He said, but agreeing with it and, supporting it doesn't make you fit. To get fit, you got to get on the treadmill. You got to pound the pavement. You got to do the miles. You actually have to put the effort in. And as soon as you stop, you stop being fit. And that's I always love that analogy around this topic, because it does require daily or weekly activities, intentional activities, to actually keep this momentum up. It isn't enough to agree. It isn't enough to be aware. It does require action. And I think it's probably just fair to say that after you have such a big event as last summer, there is, in human nature, you're going to have this apathy as we settle back into maybe what people consider to be a more normal world where there hasn't been a big headline. It's kind of normal for people to just revert backwards, isn't it? And if so, how do you basically try and force them to, not slack off on the exercise, so to speak?
Yeah, that whoever said that is a person after my own heart, because I was in a meeting yesterday where I used basically the exact same analogy. And I said, it's a muscle and it needs to be exercised. And, I don't know, Matthew and Johnny, if during the height of this past summer, everyone was talking about all the anti-racism books that you need to read. And everyone was picking up books and buying them and doing all the things. And the other day, my husband and I were reading before bed, and he turned to me and he's like, oh, what are you reading? And I'm reading an anti-racism book called Mediocre. And he was like, oh, I thought you'd kind of done that. And I said, no, like it kind of needs to continue. It wasn't just in July when I'm reading the books. I need to do it now. And sometimes I'll pick up a podcast or listen to an audiobook or something. It has to continue. And to your point, Johnny, it's a muscle that needs to be exercised.
I'm going to jump to our second article, as I think this is a nice continuation of the conversation. And this comes from Forbes, and this is a really interesting survey, and it's an inside look at the sentiment of Black and brown professionals in corporate America. So if you haven't checked out the article, it's on Forbes. It's called Exclusive Survey, an Inside Look at the Sentiment of Black and brown professionals in corporate America. And Forbes described this as their inaugural survey that they're hopefully going to run this regularly. But unfortunately, unsurprisingly, it doesn't make for comfortable reading. It's a really important read because it highlights the real reality of the situation for, I think it's 750 surveyed individuals who self-describe as Black and brown in corporate America. Were either of you surprised at the numbers and the stats here? And I'll call out some of them. 55% say employers are not transparent about DEI progress. 63%, it's nearly 2/3, saying they're not being given the same opportunities of white employees. 36% not comfortable bringing authentic self to work. An example given of two women who were interviewed saying they were comfortable wearing their hair in their more natural cultural style because they felt it highlighted their cultural difference. Do these stats, surprise you, either of you?
No, not at all. Sorry, Catalina.
No. I agree with you, Matthew. I think it's reading the article, like I've lived it, right? I've been on the receiving end, especially when I lived in the US, and the Latin American community is seen as a very isolated minority. There's a lot of microaggressions that get thrown your way, and I've experienced it. But I also very much recognize that I'm a beneficiary of white privilege. So I've also been in rooms where problematic things have been said about Black colleagues or about the concept of diversity and inclusion in general. And hearing that I have no doubts that this is happening, and that these experiences captured in this survey are only just a tiny snapshot of what's being experienced in most corporate environments.
Yeah, and I think, Johnny, what we found last year at EY is we have something called a REN network, race ethnicity network, and we had a number of company calls in the UK. We invited leadership on, and Black colleagues came on and described their experiences. And they were very emotional, very powerful experiences, life at work, but also life out, in everyday life as well, talking about experiences of racism, microaggressions, etc. And I think it really shook the company, and it shook the leadership, because when you really get into these stories and hear what's happening and what's happening in life and how people are feeling, it then gives you that agenda. We must do something. We must make a difference. And I think the key thing that we've been trying to do at EY is to listen and to learn and to self-reflect and see what we can do. And, I've benefited, obviously, from white privilege, but now I'm in the role that I want to make a difference, and I'm really listening. And it's great to work for EY that is working on a host of initiatives that we can, share with the viewers as we go through. But I think the key bit of advice is for any company is listen to your employees, listen to the experience that they've been going through. And I think that when you start to listen, that gives you the agenda for change, and we're supporting them. And it's fascinating seeing that, how we had these sessions last year, and we continue to have them now, and anti-racism workshops, etc. And, colleagues reaching out to support and to listen and make a difference. So, that's a key bit of advice today, is listen and learn, and then, make a change agenda based on that.
So the last decade, as I've been following EY UK Ireland, because again, just want to call out EY, whilst it has 300,000 employees, I think, worldwide, it's a member firm where it isn't like a traditional corporate hierarchy where you'd have, CEO, her board, and you make decisions around the world. You've got partners in different parts of the world, and it's much more consensus. I compare Switzerland to the UK. You have to, technically, these are semi-autonomous states, if you like, who can do their own thing, but they agree to cooperate. So it's quite a unique organization. And I know my understanding is obviously not everything works this exact same way. There's obviously global guidelines.
Yeah, definitely. I think Johnny is frozen there, but I can take the gist of what you were saying. And I think, when we talk about EY, I think the key thing to say is that, particularly for us in the focus of UKI, we're on a journey. We're not going to sit on this call today and Catalina and I say we're the benchmark, we're the best practice. We're actually just going to sit and say we're very much learning. We're on a journey. We've set out a series of measures, and our goal is to improve and to become much more diverse as a company over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and not stop. So, I mean, Catalina, there's a number of initiatives we could, take people through. I don't know if you want to do that.
Yeah, well, and I think, Matthew, to speak a little bit to that and to Johnny's point around us being a global organization, but also being very UK centric, I think when the events of last summer happened and the unfortunate murder of George Floyd caused this global conversation, there was a tension in the UK firm, and Matthew, tell me if I'm wrong, but around, well, does this apply to us? And everyone was a little bit nervous. And it was to your point around the listening and hearing, and our Black colleagues saying, yes, this does apply. We are hurting. This feels close to home. I know I watched the video and was shocked, and I felt for my friends in the US, and I immediately went online and started doing research around how relevant is this to my role here in the UK. If I'm honest, I didn't have any friends here that I could ask, or really any close colleagues at that point, because I was relatively new to the organization. And that listening and actually taking a moment to reflect and say, this global conversation does apply to us, and what do we need to do, was really important. And so as a result, to speak to your point about initiatives, we released in July our 7 anti-racism commitments around the key things that we're going to do to tackle anti-racism within the firm. And not saying that that's the end all be all, but it's definitely a start. And maybe perhaps, Matthew, we can look at some of those anti-racism commitments that we made. I think that one of the big ones that we made is to train our population on race fluency and allyship. That's a big one. We actually just launched a big race fluency training module that's being rolled out across the firm that all of our people are completing to really understand, what does a microaggression mean? I actually found that when I first joined the firm and I spoke to some of our recruiters, Matthew, I spoke about microaggressions and someone stopped me and said, I don't actually know what that means. I've heard the term before. And, that was a bit shocking to me, but you say, okay, well, this is an opportunity to educate. And so that's what we've been doing as a firm. And we're certainly using this as an opportunity to also speak about allyship, because anti-racism is about dismantling systems of oppression, and that applies to other aspects of identity as well. It applies to ableism, it applies to sexuality, it applies to gender. And so those are all things that we're focused on, in addition to our focus on anti-racism.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what we've probably found hardest of all is, as we go out to, hi, Johnny, good to see you back. What we found hardest of all, Johnny, is, this is such a difficult area for people to feel, free to speak. So when we have team meetings, we talk about microaggressions and anti-racism. They're very well received. And I think the difficulty is that there's a nervousness of people saying their opinion because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They want to, be part of what's happening, but there's that fear to really say something. Again, that's something that we're trying to create, that safe space that people feel free to, offer up their opinions and their experiences and what we can do to help. But we recognise that it's a very, very difficult subject for people to speak out of at the moment.
I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, because I had to unfortunately get cut off for 4 or 5 minutes due to a power outage in the home.
We kept you going. Oh no, he may have gone again.
Uh-oh.
Oh, he's gone again. So yeah, Catalina, that's very much a real experience for us, isn't it, in terms of people creating those open spaces and feeling free to speak out.
Yeah. And I think we saw it, Matthew, over the course of the summer as we were having some of these dialogues, people slowly getting more and more comfortable with having the conversation. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a little while. And it also takes leadership like yours, for example, where you've said, this is a priority. We are going to speak about it. And you've shown up to all of the conversations and contributed and asked people questions. And that, I think, is really important. That top-down view from leadership saying, this is important. And then everyone else from the bottom up saying, we care as well. Let's meet in the middle and let's work on this together.
Yeah. No, I agree. And for people watching on the podcast and, afterwards as well, I think, what are our sort of the pillars of our commitments? What are we trying to do? And I think we're trying to create 3 pillars. And the first is to create that culture of belonging, that everybody feels part of the company. There's a safe space and everybody, has that sense of belonging. The second is having a differential focus on race and gender. So we're looking to double the proportion of our female partners. And have 40% females in place by 2025, July 2025. And again, we're looking to desegregate the term BAME down, but just as a generic here, we're looking at 20% of our partners being BAME partners by July 2025 as well. And then the third part of those pillars is creating and being a leading and disruptive voice on D&I. So making sure our leaders, making them feel accountable and open to talk freely and really empowering their teams. And, keenly from a recruitment point of view, one of our key areas is to make sure that we bring in a more diverse workforce and flourish and have the right support systems and structures in and training and develop to be able to reach their potential and moving forward. So I think those 3 pillars are the sort of things that we're focused on at EY. And I think, with our anti-racism commitments, we can break that down even further, can't we?
Yeah, and all of the work that we do falls underneath those 3 different pillars. I see, Matthew, that there was a comment that came through from James. It says, when discussing diversity, do we need to be more specific and say the actual words like gender, race, neurodiverse, etc.? Is the term diversity itself too vague? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know I do, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, no, you go first.
Well, I think I think the term diversity is too vague. And sometimes we fall into the trap. I know I fall into the trap, and I'm trying to not do it, is to say things like a diverse candidate. There is no such thing as a diverse candidate. Diversity is a group attribute. And we need to be very specific about what we're trying to do. And we are focusing on our Black colleagues, for example, or our Asian colleagues. We have a South Asian community, for example, at EY, and we need to be very specific. And we can't shy away from saying Black. And that's not a bad word. It's an aspect of identity that people are proud of, and that we should be proud of, and that we should embrace. And so I definitely think that companies need to be very specific about what they're doing, and to be openly discussing and using terms so that you are targeting the exact thing that you're trying to work towards, and the exact aspect of identity that you're trying to make more comfortable at your organization. And we certainly have a lot of work to do at EY when it comes to helping out, for example, our non-binary colleagues. We've been collecting data on this, but we don't have enough data to really say what initiatives do we need in place to make them feel more comfortable.
Yeah. At the top of the hour, Catalina, you were saying about asking questions being so important, and discussing these yourself as well, Matt. And I know that we had a good friend of ours, Sama Wadani, work with us recently on launching allyship training. And one of the things that she shared with me, and our audience, when she was on a live event we did a few months ago, was that, there's a lot of uncomfortableness around language, and people don't know what to say, or, what label somebody wants, if they, what's the right term to use. And her advice was, ask somebody. It just starts by having a conversation. It's okay to be ignorant, once, so to speak. But if you find yourself not sure, go ask somebody, in a respectful way, and you'll get an insight. One is, of course, don't assume that person speaks for everybody that might be of the same color, gender, or background. But it's about engaging, and about being comfortable to have those conversations, and ask somebody, what are you comfortable with? Does this word make you feel uncomfortable? Should I use that? Should I not? What's your experience? That's how you kind of break down these barriers, I think, is being comfortable to have these conversations.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, Selma is absolutely a real force in the industry. And we turn to her for advice as well from an EY perspective. And, Catalina and I have had her on calls. I think, she's a really tower of good. And the advice that we're getting from her is magnificent. So if anybody doesn't know her, certainly look her up and, reach out to her. I think she's a brilliant force for good in this industry.
I'd love to ask you both a question, if I don't mind me bringing up some history of, what I know of EY's recruiting processes and policies. And several years ago, I did an interview, but it was in a small pub in London with Dan Richards, who previously held the role you hold today, Matt. And he had shared with our audience how EY in the UK in particular had done something that was quite unexpected and different, particularly for the big four audit firms, which was to change the policy around the way that individuals were hired on what the so-called milk round or out of college process. And just to give those from outside the UK a bit more color, it would have typically been somebody with a certain level of degree, 2-1, 1-1, being the equivalent of a GPA high score average in the US or elsewhere. That would have been a cut from certain universities, would have been typically how professional services firms hired. And if you're from that university with that grade, you're in and you can apply for the process. And EY were, I think, the first professional service firm that I knew on scale who changed that and, opened up the process to a lot more candidates with a very deliberate intention of having individuals from very different backgrounds being able to apply who were excluded. And I know in the early years, that was bearing great fruit in the increased diversity, even in the first year's cohort that were hired in that group. I wonder if maybe, Matt, you could speak to that process and how it's evolved over the years, and maybe Catalina to perhaps some of the results that the firm has seen in terms of increased diversity amongst different angles across the firm since then.
Yeah, and I think, you hit the nail on the head. We used to be a very Russell Group focused, very focused on those core universities, going there, competing on campus against the rest of the big four and other companies. And we really wanted to turn that whole process on its head. The best candidate can come from anywhere. And we wanted it to be a blind process. By blind, not knowing where they come from and what their experience was and who they were, and putting them into our application methods and through our assessment systems, and really seeing who the best people were to come out of that. Again, you can imagine that we've got people coming from different parts of the UK, different educational backgrounds, different social economic backgrounds, and different cultures, but we're still maintaining the quality of the people that we want to see. And when you start getting people from those, different backgrounds, you're changing the culture of the company, because you're not coming from those set universities and those set individuals that becomes very familiar. So I think that we're on that journey, and it's still a journey that we're looking at. We're constantly looking at the way we assess our candidates. I think now we're debating about some of the more, rigorous tests that we have, particularly our NRT and our maths tests, about how do we look at more about potential? How do we assess on potential, which again will help those from different backgrounds as well. So, it's a constant evolving path in the way that we're recruiting. And, Catalina happily talk about, the effects in terms of diversity.
Yeah, well, and I think, Matthew, that's a really important point that you made in terms of evolving, right? Because we did that a few years back, and we've seen good success from it. So we've increased our ethnic minority population, with the highest increase being at 5% at junior levels, which we're very proud of, but we still recognize we have a significant way to go. And when we break down data at each stage of the recruitment process, we do still have some stops. And so those are ongoing conversations where, to Matthew's point, we're looking at our tests, we're looking at the way that we assess candidates, not just for specific competencies, and what questions are we asking. And those are all really important things that I think every organization needs to do. It's great to do a brand new initiative, but how is your initiative performing, and how can you consistently refine that initiative to ensure that it's actually achieving what you want it to achieve? And I think that's where we're at right now. We're at a key inflection point where we need to do some good reflection and thinking, how can we push the needle even further?
One of the ways that I read recently that you're looking to push that needle further and continue, as you say, to evolve the policy is the commitment, which I believe begins in 2021, to hiring, I think, 30% Black for internships and 30% Black from that normal graduate intake, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk me through, the reasoning behind that, why those numbers, and what the time frame expected is to be? And then, if I can ask one further question, what are you doing to try and ensure you hit those goals critically?
Yeah, so I'm happy to speak to this. So I think, Johnny, what you're referencing is that one of our 7 anti-racism commitments that we made this summer is that we're going to offer at least 30% of the work experience places in our Smart Futures, Our Futures program to Black young people in the next 5 years. And we're hoping to use that as a pathway into making sure that at least 30% of Black young alumni from these programs actually enter EY. And so, to give you a bit of background, these programs are done through the EY Foundation, which is a registered charity that EY had started. And that's actually something that is ongoing conversations around, how do we make this happen? And how do we ensure that not only are we increasing the Black young population that enters these programs in the EY Foundation, but then ensuring their success when they get into EY. And if I'm honest, I think, Matthew, I don't know how it's been for you, but I think this has produced a lot of dialogue at EY into how do we make this happen. I know in the past months, I've been in several brainstorming sessions with EY and EY Foundation, with leaders all across the firm, really saying, okay, let's think differently about the way we traditionally do things, and let's push ourselves beyond what we've traditionally done. And if I'm honest, it's been actually quite exciting and such a breath of fresh air to have people say, like, let's scrap everything we used to think was a barrier and let's push ourselves. And so part of why we've said that we're starting that in FY21 is because we still needed that little bit of ramp period around figuring out how we were going to accomplish this. And I'm really excited to see what we can do.
Yeah. And I think, Johnny, it doesn't take much. Is that there's also the challenge here of looking at the talent pool and how we make sure we grow it. So, anybody can leap on here from and use Google and have a look at, the number of Black partners in EY or any of the big 4. Then they can look at any of the big tech companies as well. And then, in a simple way, you could have said in the past, well, go headhunt. So go and, map out the rest of the big 4 and try and attract across. Go and look at some of the other big players that you want to recruit and try and do that. But there is still that scarcity of talent at that level that we can do. So it's, again, how do we grow? How do we attract more talent into EY? What are the traditional ways that we've looked at attracting talent? And again, we're forming, new relationships with different networks, with black networks as well, to try and bring in more talent and grow within and do that. So the old recruitment book that we used to have is sort of out of the window as we look at new networks, new ways of recruiting, new ways of growing from within, new ways from bringing people in and giving the right support structures and the right training and development and encouragement to be the best they can. And that's the best way forward that we can go for, in a market where there's not that sort of seniority of talent that's currently in place in amongst the big four or amongst some of the big leadership companies.
Speaking of those processes, oh, sorry, Catalina.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think one thing is we speak about this and we speak it to recruitment. And I have noticed that this happens quite a bit across several organizations where they say, okay, we have a diversity issue, and they immediately look to recruitment. And recruitment isn't the solve to everything. And so that's one important thing that I just want to highlight, is that although we're talking about some of these things that we're doing to attract talent and to bring them into the organization, that is all coupled by extensive processes and data analysis and conversations to look at the way that we progress and promote those individuals and retain them ultimately. Because if you're not looking at that and you're just solely focused on recruitment, you're missing something here. And we even had the conversation over the summer where we noticed that our Black employees didn't have the same experience as our white counterparts. And so we're not going to go out there in the marketplace and say, come join us, we're the best place to be, because that's not authentic. We need to do some work on the inside. So just do think it's important to highlight that it's not just a recruitment thing. It's about the entire employee life cycle as well.
I think that speaks to a question one of our listeners has asked. Abhishek Sharma is asking, hi, Catalina and Matthew, what are EY practices to ensure commitment to inclusion while recruiting, hiring? And is this practice consistent at your global site? So I think maybe it's speaking to the specific examples of what you do to ensure that commitment to inclusion, to your point, Catalina, of it going beyond the initial hire.
So one of the things that comes top of mind to this question that we've been focused on quite a bit over the last few months is around inclusive leadership, and how you assess inclusive leadership and how important it is that all of our people be inclusive leaders. And we've trying to take that to the next step by actually making inclusive leadership as a core competency that gets assessed in the interview process, so that our candidates get asked, how are you bringing other people along? How do you currently create a diverse team in the way you work? And making all of the answers to these questions just as important as their commercial value and how much they're bringing in their current firm. And that's been a big one that we use to ensure the commitment to inclusion. Another one is that we're having a lot of conversations, Matthew and I, with our recruiters around challenging non-inclusive feedback, right? Sometimes people have reasons for not wanting to hire someone, and they may not put them all in their feedback, or they may say this person's not a fit. Well, we need our recruiters to ask, what does a fit mean? What's the background behind a fit? Are you hiring based off of a preference? Are you hiring based off of tradition? Because if so, that doesn't sound like a job requirement to me. That sounds like you have affinity bias, or like you're choosing people based off of what you know to be success and not what the firm actually has deemed to be success. And so those are some of the ways that we've done it. When I first joined EY, I basically dissected the recruitment process through each stage. And we've sat down with the recruiters and said, these are all of the tiny little things that you need to do to ensure that inclusion is kept at the forefront of everything that we do from a recruitment perspective.
Question for you, Matt. Matt, as a leader in the firm, when you take that topic of inclusive leadership that Catalina's mentioned as a competency, coming into the firm in the last year, Matt, how have you seen that play out in your own team? And personally, what differences do you notice in your own style, if any, in the last year being in a firm that actually calls that out as a value and requires it of its leaders? What do you find yourself doing differently, or thinking differently, or how do you find yourself acting differently in your leadership style and in your routines?
And I think the key thing there is, again, just being inclusive and trying to make that sense of belonging for the team. And so, listening to every voice in the team. And, there was a lot of hurt and a lot of emotion, and there was a lot of anger surrounding George Floyd. And that anger hasn't gone. It's still there, but that's turning that anger into the passion to make a difference. So I sat down with the team, and we formed a diversity committee, and it's formed in a number of areas, looking at a whole host of things that we as a team do to make a difference. And we're still coming back with new ideas. And again, we're not saying that we are the benchmark. We're on a journey, we're learning. And I think as a leader, normally you feel you've got the answers to everything. And this is an area that you don't. You have to absolutely listen and include everybody in the team and listen to those voices. So I've made sure that I've been much more open, spending time with everybody in the team, listening to their views. What would they do differently if they were a leader and in my shoes? What would they do? And listening to those suggestions has really made me take a step back. And again, I come, as was said earlier, from the position of benefiting from white privilege, but I have to make a difference for my team. My team is not diverse to the levels that I would like it to be. So we're on a journey with that. We're on a journey with the company as well, seeking to attract, the very best diverse talent there is out there. And again, these are big challenges that, we're on team, absolutely one team, and we're in this together. Again, we get the results together, but that forms a difference in my leadership style, that it's much more inclusive, much more bringing in and listening more than I have ever done in my life. And, Catalina has been, a real beacon to me of sharing material and books to read and, in areas I'm not an expert in. And it's really made me step up to the plate and to really open myself up to learning where, previously I would have thought, I know it all, I can do it. What I've learned over the last year is how little I do know. And again, I'm very much on that learning journey. And, Catalina has been key in really helping me open my eyes up to how much I've got to learn as well.
It's been said many times before. Sorry, Matthew.
I'm sorry, John. I just wanted to say, to give Matthew some credit in terms of inclusive leadership. I also think it's the little things. You came in and you made it a point. You said, I'm going to meet with every single member of the team, regardless of level, over the course of my first few months. That's no easy feat, right? We're about a 100-person team, and you sat down with every single person. And that in and of itself creates a sense of inclusion for everyone at the firm for everyone in the team, to say, I have access to my leader. I can tell them how I'm feeling. I can tell them what I'm thinking. That, I think, is a big one. Over the summer, we were doing, and actually for several weeks, we were doing bi-weekly anti-racism workshops. And Matthew was dialed on to every single call, engaging with the content and telling people to attend. I've certainly been on teams before where the leaders say diversity and inclusion is important, but then they don't show up. And so that's, I think, the difference, right? It's not just talking about it, but it's being about it. And so that, I think, just to give you some credit of definitely you showing inclusive leadership in your day-to-day style, not just saying that you care, but actually doing it.
It's been said many times that, you want to know what's important to a CEO, look at what she measures. How is it important that the business has metrics around this? And, what metrics do either of you see as being the ones that keep the whole organization kind of on rhythm for this? Consider it like the bass drum in a band. It's like we constantly have to look at this. Whilst, of course, we're not doing it for the sake of a metric. In anything, if you want to get consistency over time, because lots of things just take time. They take years perhaps to fix or improve. You have to have metrics. You have to keep focused on those. Go back to them. How are we achieving? What have you seen that's worked across the business? I know, Catalina, you mentioned about how do you hold leaders accountable for being more inclusive? Like, what's the measurement of that? Can you give me an examples of what you've seen work, even in small parts of EY to date?
So data informs a huge part of our diversity and inclusion strategy. So we track everything. We track the way people are recruited. We track promotion, retention, all of those things that I mentioned. We also track the way people are feeling through surveys and their sense of belonging across the firm. And so that's been a big conversation recently, is we have these global people surveys that get asked, and there's a question in there around belonging. And we're consistently looking at that question from all the different aspects of identity and seeing how the scores are improving. And so that, I think, is a very simple one that any organization can do, is just surveying your people consistently and seeing, are your Black employees feeling welcome? Are your non-binary employees feeling welcome? How are they feeling about the policies? I was in a conversation the other day around, I think there's a review that's happening in terms of our rewards and recognitions program, and how are we considering the way all aspects of identity perceive that within the company. And you can really only do that if you're tracking data and having targets and measures. I will say, though, that personally, I often find that people like to use data as a bit of a diversion tactic. So I would say to be wary of that, because I have had conversations with leaders who say, oh yes, I'd love to talk about D&I, but at first I'd like to see the data. And then we show the data and they say, but how about this? And then I start to realize that you're actually just turning me around in circles looking for data because you don't want to get into the nitty gritty of what I'm trying to tell you, which is that your people don't feel like they belong, or you're asking questions that are problematic in an interview process. And so data is great, but it's not everything in some regards.
Matt, you've probably seen it in your dashboard as well, because I've seen it in the dashboards of many TA leaders in the last year, adding at the very least, a diversity of slate metric in as one of the core top 5 KPIs in TA. Have you seen similar kind of positive metrics being used within hiring that have driven you and your team?
Yeah, and I think, there's always going to be metrics in this area and always things for us to achieve. But I think, echoing Catalina's point is there that it's about that culture that you're creating and that sense that it's sometimes difficult to measure, and you can have employee surveys and things like that. But it's that sense of belonging that you're empowering the team to make a difference, and you're having those different different people coming into the organization and really challenging and make a difference. So again, with metrics, the number of diverse candidates on a short list and all of those sort of things, are key to any organization. But I think it's, again, the softer areas that you can't measure as much, which makes a huge difference. And, looking at last a week ago, we had a special student campaign week, and it was focused on well-being. And these are very tough times for students, and students of all backgrounds and all diversities. And, we introduced a raft of speakers, and you listen to someone like Anthony Joshua and his story and the journey that he's been on and the challenges that he's had, somebody we all look up to as, a real physical character of strength, but someone who's got there through hard work and training and sacrifice. And you hear about the challenges he's had to get to where he's at. And that sort of inspirational story is something that we as all companies should be amplifying, the success stories that we hear of celebrities that people look up to. And I think simple things like that is that, yes, all these metrics have an important part, but it's us as a company. How are we telling the stories? How are we giving platforms to people to give their amplification to their voice? So, with Black History Month and with the commemoration of George Floyd, what can we as a company do to actually go back into the market and add value and give something different for people to listen to? And I think that's something we as leaders need to do as well as looking at those metrics.
I'm glad you brought up Black History Month, actually, as I'm going to, if you don't mind, both just hang on for one more question from an audience member. So Geronda Wallach is asking, or she's saying, first of all, telling some background, her company is new to building its DEI strategy. The focus has been on educating on BLM and bringing in a Black-owned firm to support with bringing the company along on the journey. Her question is, her company has missed a great opportunity to celebrate Black History Month. And it could be because they want to expand the focus on other diverse groups. But she'd love to get your thoughts on whether this could still be an opportunity. Is there still time, and could they benefit from that?
Brilliant question. I would encourage yes. You don't have to do something just to commemorate a certain month with Black History Month. Is that we need to continue to air and have different voices across the whole of the year. So absolutely, I would say get out there, and it doesn't matter if you didn't commemorate Black History Month. Do it in any other month of the year, but you're doing something and you're keeping the message alive. And I think that's the key thing, Catalina, that we need to encourage.
Yeah, I would agree. And Black history is our history. Any country has an element of Black history, and you don't need a month specifically to commemorate it. I will say that companies that are newer to building their D&I strategy are likely overwhelmed, right? They have a lot of things to focus on. There is some tension in the system. We have to be really honest about it, where we were focused so much on race this summer that other aspects of identity, people felt like they were being ignored. They were like, well, what about me? I also have experienced microaggressions, and I also feel excluded. And what we need to remember is that all of these efforts are ultimately dismantling systems of oppression that have kept us from being a truly inclusive organization or community or society. And so by helping one community, we are helping all communities. And so I definitely think that highlighting Black history throughout the year, and maybe if you feel comfortable to come up with something and say, you know what, I'm going to share this one thing, when we had Black History Month a few months ago here in the UK, there were some colleagues who actually created a Black History Month advent calendar. They completely took it upon themselves. Nobody asked them to. And it was really nice where every day you could click on the advent calendar and get a new fact about Black British history. And that calendar circulated the whole firm of just something that somebody did off the side of their desk, but it made a huge difference. And so it could just come from you too, if you feel compelled, or if you have a friend or colleague that can help you, and you could make a difference by doing that as well.
I'm conscious of both your time. You've been very, very generous with your time, and also, allowed for your host to drop off with his poor internet today. And I thank you for both being amazing pros and continuing the conversation. I'm sure our viewers and listeners really respect that. So thank you both. But we're at the end of the show, way past the end of the show normally. And it's time where I ask our guests who join us every week to please perhaps add to what we call our shortlist of tips and advice from leaders who join us on the show. And I'm going to ask each of you perhaps to share with our audience a tip you can leave us with that's either something that you've garnered from your own career and experience or was handed to you by somebody else. And maybe I'll ask Matt to start, and then we'll finish with Catalina, your tip. Matt.
Yeah, my tip is just very simple. It's just listen. Go out to your teams and listen to their stories, listen to their views. We are busy, and, even in the middle of a pandemic when we're working from home, workloads are huge, but carve out time and listen to everybody and really challenge yourself and expose yourself to new ideas. And, it really does make a difference and make you rethink and really learn. So just a simple one, get out to your teams, listen to their stories, listen to what they say, and you'll absolutely create that culture that people are then with you and on that journey and moving forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Catalina.
So I think for me, the biggest one I would say is, first, you don't need a diversity and inclusion title to be making a difference at your organization. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, we have a team focused on this and this isn't my role, but it's really up to all of us to be inclusive. And with that in mind, it's actually the little things that done consistently and thoughtfully that make the most difference. It doesn't have to be a massive initiative for you to move the needle on this. You actually, all those little things that seem insignificant in isolation, when done together and done well, will actually really have a huge impact.
I love that. They won't fix it, we will. Catalina, Matt, thank you both for joining me, for helping me get through the show despite my technical difficulties. It's been a real pleasure, and I think both of you should be proud of the work you're doing with EY, and your colleagues in particular should be really proud of the work that the firm is doing. Again, no firm out there is trying to say that they're the best or they've nailed everything, but I have nothing but admiration for the hard work and effort. And if I could leave with one comment, is that I think EY is a firm, particularly in the UK, that has always added to the areas of diversity that the firm has been focused on. It's difficult to focus, and I've seen the firm continue to add to the type of issues that it's trying to explore. Whereas it could be easy just to swap out one issue for another. It's hard work. I can only imagine the lengths you have to go to manage all the different types of areas you're trying to unravel and fix within the organization. But I think it's probably a case study for many. And if you want to check it out, I'm sure Catalina and Matt, you won't mind anyone reaching out directly to ask you about ideas about what the firm has done and what you're doing as well, and that guidance. Thank you both for joining us. Wish you very well and success with EY's Initiative 2021 and your targets. We'd love to have you back on the show to hear how they're going sometime soon.
Thank you so much.
So we'll be back next week, hopefully without technical difficulties. Thanks for your patience for my drop off this week. That's just one of those things. It hasn't happened to this extent before. It'll happen again. This is life in the post-pandemic world. But next week, we're going to be joined by another great guest. That's going to be a live broadcast next week on the Wednesday, the 24th of February. Don't forget that's live on YouTube and LinkedIn, but will be available on podcast by that evening. And we're going to be joined by Kevin Oakes, CEO and co-founder of I4CP. And Kevin is a fantastic author, speaker, and expert who's going to be talking about company culture and how to ensure company culture doesn't become a casualty. Fascinating gentleman with tons of research and experience. Trust me, all of you will want to hear what Kevin has to say, his great insights. It's a pleasure to have him guest on the show next week. So please tune in, mark that in your podcasts or put that in your diary for 4 p.m. at UK Ireland time. That's 11 a.m. on the East Coast, the US, 8 a.m. on the West Coast. and you can Google where it is in your time zone if you want to catch us live. We always welcome your comments and thanks. And thanks to all of you who joined us live today with your comments. Always a pleasure to have you. We love your live comments. They make a big difference on the show. And we hope you will rejoin us next week for our next session on culture. Until then, have a good week.